Hello, I'm Charles Mallet with a UK Column interview. There'll be notes and links posted with the interview at ukcolumn.org. I'm joined by Joel Salatin, who is a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. Those are his words and not mine. Joel, thank you very much indeed for joining me. I wish you a warm welcome to UK Column.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Good. Now, what I'd like to do before we get into what you are doing and your sort of current philosophy and ideas is just to go back a bit and give the audience the chance to understand how you've got to where you are and how your life before now sort of took shape. So going back to it, because I know that your family certainly were involved in Venezuela before moving to Virginia. If you can just give us an idea of how it is that you came to be involved in farming in the way that you are now to start with, please.
Well, sure. So my paternal grandfather always wanted to farm, but he never did. He worked in an automobile factory in Indiana and had a great big garden. But he was truly an entrepreneur and inventor. He invented the very first walking garden sprinkler. That winds up its hose, and walks through called it the sprink reel. He patented it. And so he was a bit of a very, inventive, creative guy and was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine in 1945 when it came out. Had large compost piles and all this kind of thing. And then so my dad kind of got that environmental, that non-chemical bent from him and the love of farming and all. And so here he is, my dad, after he was in the Navy in World War II, and got out and wanted to farm. But here you are, a Midwestern boy, no money, no land. What do you do? And so he devised a plan to go to South America, earn money, and buy land. And that's exactly what he did. He went with Texas Oil Company to Venezuela in the early oil exploration of the wildcat ventures off of the coast of Venezuela. This was the beginning of OPEC, and in 7 years was able to save enough money to buy a 1,000-acre piece of land. We started raising chickens, and he quickly took over the local chicken market because our chickens were cleaner than the indigenous chickens at the time. And that made a lot of neighbors angry. They didn't like the fact that Dad had, these Spanish type of markets where, the farmers bring their wares into the marketplace and, you have the vendors there lined up buying. And so when the junta came there in 1959 of ousting Perez Jimenez, we became collateral damage, if you will, of the breakdown of law and order that happens, when there's anarchy and a coup. And so we basically fled the back door as the machine guns came in the front door as neighbors settled scores that they wouldn't settle under normal circumstances. And after 6 months trying to stay, we finally, every door closed. And so we got back on a ship and arrived back in the U.S. Easter Sunday, 1961. And Dad still wanted to go back. He was 39. He'd been there 12 years. He loved the people, loved the language, loved the culture. I mean, how can you not like a place that grows bananas and pineapples and papayas, in the backyard? And so that's why we didn't go back to the Midwest and instead looked at farms within a day's drive of Washington, D.C., so that if things settled, we could get to an embassy quickly and get paperwork and get back. That never happened, but that's why we ended up here in Virginia, 3 hours away from Washington, D.C., and bought the most gullied, worn-out farm, very, very cheap, available. It was definitely the armpit of the community. And looking back now, I remember when I hit 39, Dad was 39, and I was thinking, wow, if I lost it all, would I start over? And Dad went up in my estimation when I realized what that meant. And we started over. And so I was 4 when we came here to this property, and we started, how do you fix, how do you repair an eroded rock pile, gully, infertile place? And Dad sought advice from both government sources and private sources. How do we do this? And all the advice was plant corn, buy chemical fertilizers, borrow money, build silos, plow more ground, graze the woods, all that sort of thing. Well, he knew that wasn't the right approach, and so we began experimenting, with a lot of things, from composting to rotational grazing, moving the animals, electric fencing. He invented some electric fencing materials, portable shade mobiles for animals, mobile farm infrastructure, and over time, gradually developed kind of a, oh, I don't know, an economically and ecologically workable recipe for restoration. And so over my lifetime, I've watched the soil build up over the rocks. I've watched the gullies, heal up, and it's gone from the most abused farm in the community to arguably the most abundant.
You paint an amazing picture, but also you describe it in such a way that it sounds almost too simple, which it can't have been. It clearly has been an epic challenge, and then will have been enormous sort of amounts of learning along the way. I know you're
Right.
fond of quoting Alan Savory in terms of
Yes.
everything relating to everything. I think just
Sure.
Can we just give the audience an encapsulation of what it was that Savory meant by that, how you interpret that, and how that relates to the land that you care for?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And when Savory says everything relates to everything, and of course, he didn't invent that phrase. It's a very actually an Eastern, not a Western concept, that we're all related. It's the idea we're all relatives. And so how that kind of came out at our place was to realize that this is fundamentally, or that farming, if you will, is fundamentally a biological pursuit, not a mechanical pursuit. And that is a fundamental difference. We still, in our Western, Greco-Roman Western reductionist, linear thinking, compartmentalized, individualized, disconnected thinking, we still think that life is fundamentally mechanical. That's how we have license to pull genes out of this, put genes over here, DNA from here, DNA over there. And we view our animals and our plants as basically a sophisticated wheel bearing, or a sophisticated transmission. All right, and it's about parts, and that and there is certainly elements to that. I mean, we know that there are different tissues and different organs and different things. We understand that, but at its most fundamental essence, life is fundamentally biological, not mechanical. And what that means is, for example, your body and mine, Charles, we have trillions of microbes inside of us who are making decisions. Hey, I want a little boron from you. Can you give me a little polysaccharide over here? And there's this unbelievable a commerce, like a trade fair, going on inside of us, in our gut, in our blood vessels, and it's going on out in the ecology. The bird is looking for a nesting place, and the cow is looking for a certain plant to feed its microbiome, and all of these decisions and these fascinating relationships are being developed in us and around us. And so you can't just pull out one piece without affecting all these other pieces. And so our whole philosophy and mentality was viewing the farm and our ecology as a whole, and not, well, we're corn farmers, or we're apple growers, or we're wheat farmers, but rather that we're actually stewards of a whole organ here, a whole ecosystem. And how do we balance out economic, emotional, and ecological interests to move the whole forward, and not just parts of it, not just exploit pieces of it for short-term gain.
Absolutely. And of course, you identify the trap that farmers have been either pushed into or fallen into for decades, which is exactly as you described, the insistence that well, first of all, innovation and progress must mean technology, it must mean increased mechanization and all that side of it. But of course, the obverse may in fact be the case. Just describe, therefore, with that philosophy, how you arrived at deciding to do the specific, well, and indeed the general things that you have done and are doing that have sort of led you to where you are now.
Sure. So when you take that approach, you move from hubris to humility as you look at nature's patterns. And so when you look at nature's patterns, it's really elegantly simple. I mean, if you think about it, in nature, animals move. Let's just take a very simple thing. Animals move. They're not in confinement houses. They're not locked up in factories. They actually move. And so as soon as you take that approach, then a whole bunch of other threads, cascade out of that understanding. Well, if animals move, then I've got to I've got to be able to control them. I've got to be able to shelter them wherever they happen to be. I've got to be able to get water wherever they have to be. And so what happens is a simple phrase like that, animals move, germinates a whole a bunch of related things that you have to create or develop in order to facilitate something as simple as animals move. Well, now we don't make big, confinement buildings. Instead, we figure out how to make mobile shelters. And so we one of the first things that Dad did was make a great big mobile shelter for the cows, like a portable shade tree. So we weren't, and we moved it around with the cows, and so we could get all the manure and the urine that the cows were generating not under trees, but out in the pasture, where it needed to be, and that was a signal part. Then we started developing water systems. We started building ponds. We've now built, 20 ponds, and we have about 20 kilometers, if you can imagine it, 20 kilometers of buried water line that gravity feeds from permaculture style high ponds up on high valleys that only get water, a few days a year. But by holding it up there, we can gravity flow, and with no pumps, no electricity, we gravity flow water over the whole farm to give water to the chickens and the pigs and the cows and the different things, and even use it for irrigation when we have significant droughts. And then, so you have your and you have control because the neighbors don't want the pigs digging up their rose bushes. All right, so we got to, if we're going to move the animals, we have to keep them at home. And so this required some sort of a portable fence system where we could manage the animals. And of course, now we have everything from electrified poultry net to poly braid electric fencing systems, computer microchipped energizers. We didn't have those things in the early days, and so all of this high tech infrastructure has come alongside now. Much of it invented in Germany, some of it invented in New Zealand and Australia to facilitate the movement of animals. So that's a long answer to a simple thing. But I hope you can understand the simple concept of animals move generates a domino effect of necessary creativity, innovation, and development, to make that forward. Another simple phrase was carbon builds soil. Soil is not built by 10-10-10 chemical fertilizer. It's not built by herbicides, and it certainly isn't built by tillage. That's the hardest thing on soil that there is. And so we sold the plow that was here when we bought the farm. There was a little plow here. So we got rid of that and let the grasses come, and devoted ourselves to a carbon economy. What that meant was that we, instead of buying fertilizer and things, we looked at how do we eliminate leaks. On the first place, how do we eliminate leaks of carbon, and then how do we leverage the carbon that we have? And so we had a lot of woods, a lot of encroached areas that had been neglected. old fields that had overgrown. And so the first really big, I guess the second big machine that we bought a dump truck early back in the early 60s. And then the next big machine we bought was a chipper, a wood chipper. And we began chipping, junk trees, crooked trees, and upgrading fence lines and wood lots and cleaning them up. And those chips then became what we call a carbonaceous diaper for the cows when they were on hay in the wintertime. And that carbonaceous diaper holds up all the manure and urine. And then we started using pigs. Dad had passed away by now. And one of my innovations that I brought to the table was we used to make big windrow compost piles to compost the barn cleanings. Now we use pigs, and we put corn in the carbonaceous diaper. It ferments in that anaerobic bedding pack, and then we put the pigs in. The pigs then seek the corn and convert it from anaerobic to aerobic compost without any petroleum or machinery or labor on my part. And the pigs enjoy doing the work. So that's another phrase in nature. Animals do the work, not people, not machines. Animals do the work. So how can we harness the plow on the pig nose, the scratcher on the chicken's feet, the beak on the duck? All right. How can we harvest those things or leverage those innate, phenotypical distinctives to honor that specialness, uniqueness of an animal to actually do things that we would otherwise use chemicals or machinery or human labor to do. And so those are just, a couple of very simple phrases. Animals move, carbon builds soil, and animals do the work. Those are three very simple phrases with profound ramifications as to how we're going to design and create a functional farm.
And yet, as you said earlier, that message has been completely subverted by the orthodoxy put forward by governments, certainly all over the Western world. And people are led to believe that they absolutely have to destroy the soil with all the sorts of chemicals you're talking about, and to put in for cash, sort of cash crops, high intensity products with high yield and all this kind of thing, because they've been convinced that that's the only way to make money out of it and to make it work as a business. But what I think I'd like to get a good understanding is, from what you're describing, which makes perfect sense, why on earth would you ever choose to work against nature and against the livestock? With that in mind, how does that then transform into making it a business venture that's viable?
Yes, well, thank you for going that direction, because often, the ecological farming community kind of punts the economy question, and so I fully embrace it. So thank you for going that direction. And so on our farm, first of all, let me say we do not aspire to independence. The whole idea that I'm going to be a self-sufficient, independent farm, I think is a devil's errand. It's much better to be mutually interdependent within a community, because there are people that know how to do things and have land that's more conducive to do things than mine here. And so, for example, we buy grain for our chickens and pigs and turkeys. We buy grain from local farmers, GMO free. It's not genetically modified, but from local farmers. We provide them an extra income for their product and a nice guaranteed market, and they they provide us a needed product. So I just want to say, first of all, I'm not interested in being an island. I'm very interested in being a community dependent kind of outfit. So with that said, we first of all, we move the cows every day to a new spot. And so in our county, Charles, the average cow day. So a cow day is our measurement. Every vocation needs a measurement. Like a carpenter uses whatever. Well, I guess in the Great Britain they use meters or centimeters. A weatherman uses temperature centigrade. A wheat farmer uses bushels. A gold trader uses ounces or troy ounces. Anyway, every vocation requires a way to measure, to audit what you're doing. And so for us, our cows, our measure is a cow day, what one cow will eat in a day. So we measure our pasture production by how many cows it's able to feed for a certain period of time. And so in our county, the average cow days per acre is 80. That means an acre will feed one cow for 80 days a year, or 80 cows for 1 day a year. Just want everybody to follow me on this. So on our farm, we now average almost 400 cow days per acre. So we're almost 5 times the county average. Why? Well, because we move the cows every day, and so we allow the grass to go through a juvenile rapid growth phase. Grass grows in a sigmoid curve, an S curve, starts slow, then it grows real fast, then it slows down as it heads towards senescence. I call the first phase diaper grass, teenage grass, and then nursing home grass. Okay, just so you see and so by moving the cows every day, we're able to place them right before senescence, right after that blaze of growth, to prune that grass and restart it. So we're already getting, arguably easily 3 times the county average on our cow days per acre from a production standpoint. And that doesn't cost very much, because all we have to do is move them, and the labor is about the same, because the cows are in a close mob rather than spread out, so we can always find them easily. We don't have to go searching around, with our ATV machine trying to find the cows. They're all in one little spot. We call this mob stocking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. And you can, if you practice in front of a mirror a lot, you can learn to say that. All right. So that's the cow component. Now, so what follows the herbivores in nature? Remember, animals are doing the work. So rather than using grubicides and parasiticides and things to keep the cows clean and bug-free, we follow the cows with eggmobiles. So these are portable chicken houses on wheels that we follow the cows. The chickens then scratch through the cow patties and scratch them out into the soil, which increases the fertility. But mainly the chickens are picking up the fly larvae, otherwise known as maggots, that would hatch and affect the cows. So the chickens are sanitizing, like the egret on the rhino's nose, the birds that are following the wildebeest in the Serengeti. This is one of the most ubiquitous symbiotic relationships in nature, is the bird and the herbivore. You put those together and they're very symbiotic. And so we follow the cows with the eggmobiles, about 4 days behind before the flies hatch. And then we're picking up tens of thousands of dollars worth of eggs as a byproduct of the pasture sanitation program. So we turn what would otherwise be a waste product into an actual for-profit enterprise. So chickens, broiler chicken, meat chickens, we run in little floorless field shelters. We move them every day across the field, and that means there's no concrete, there's no fans, there's no buildings. So we replace all of that physical depreciable infrastructure with our equity, which is more human-centric, and it's a mobile, modular, and management-intensive, replacement of depreciable, capital-intensive infrastructure with little field shelters that we just move along. And because the chickens are so healthy, and they get fresh air and sunshine, exercise, green grass, in addition to their GMO-free feed, we don't have to vaccinate, medicate, or run fans or anything like that. So there's no concrete. So there's a lot less expense in that respect. And the same ground we run the chickens on, we can graze with cows, we can graze with sheep, and we do. And so now I hope you're starting to see. And then we run turkeys. And so on the same acre, at different times of the season, we will run the broilers across. Well, that generates $12,000 an acre. And then you run the cows across to eat to prune the grass that the chickens encouraged, by dropping their chicken manure. So the cows are generating $800 an acre. Then you run the egg mobile across behind the cows. That's generating another $200 or $300 an acre. And then you can run the turkeys across the same area later in the season, and that's generating another $10,000 or $12,000 an acre. And then you can run sheep across the same area, and that's generating another $800 an acre. My point is, you add all these things up, and you're in the $20,000 to $25,000 per acre income range. And I challenge any farmer to show me how wheat, corn, or any other cropping system can generate that kind of income per acre, which means the bottom line is we're able to actually support a white collar salary farm income on basically 20 to 25 acres, which is a very exciting proposition, especially for small farmers.
It is, absolutely. However, the government doesn't want you to do it. The food industry doesn't want you to do it. And the media are, in effect, banging the drum for both of those camps. How, therefore, do you persist with it? And how do you find and exploit your market?
Well, fortunately, let me. That's a kind of two-dimensional question. One is very astute on your part to understand there is pushback. There is pushback from large interests. But the flip side, though, is that as centralization and corporatization within the food system accelerate, let's just call it industrialization of the food system with its concomitant vaccines and whatever chlorines and antimicrobials and blah blah, all those things. As that accelerates, it is actually stimulating or catalyzing a pushback on the consumer end, saying, I don't want that. I want an unvaccinated, unmedicated, GMO-free, pastured, a more nutrient-dense, safer product. Okay, so the two objectives are in tension. The consumer objective, now certainly there are consumers who don't care. They're the ones that are still eating at McDonald's or whatever. But for the ones who do, and that is a growing number, because I don't know the sentiment. I can't wait to get back to the UK. I haven't been there since before COVID, and I would typically do seminars in the UK, along, and I'm hoping to get back, but I'm assuming that there, as I read the news, that there's a lot of a similar amount of concern about the way things are, the government, the economy, whatever, and so what, as well as here, and obviously, I know UK is following our presidential election, and that's that's a huge unknown right now. My point is, I think worldwide, if I may describe it like this, you ever had a wasp nest on the back porch, and you go in and out, it's about the size of a softball, and or the palm of your hand, and those wasps just sit there every day, just kind of hanging out. You don't see them. Once in a while, one flies off and comes back. Well, one day you and your beloved decided to let's clean off the back porch. So you get the broom and you get to work and you start cleaning off the back porch, and accidentally you bang the rafter that wasp nest is on with the broom handle. And all of a sudden the wasp, they don't come after you, at least not yet, but suddenly they're all just, they're up and they're, oh, what happened? What happened? Something's not quite right. I don't know where this came from, but let's be ready. That's the way I feel like the world is right now. The world is like that disturbed wasp nest. They don't know quite where the hit came from, but they know there's been a disturbance, and people are aware. And if there's one thing you don't want to be when things go wonky, It's you don't want to be the sick one. You don't want to be the one in the back bedroom saying, "Hey, when you guys are going out to your safe haven, can you pick up my bed and bring me with you?" And so this is stimulating. This is Charles. This is stimulating a massive interest in wellness, in health, in staying functional, so that you can actually respond. If a lion's going to chase you, you want to be able to run faster than than the guy with you. Okay, and you don't have to outrun the lion. You just have to outrun the guy the guy you're with. And so we have this. I've never seen as much in my lifetime. We have this demand for high quality, nutrient dense, more safely produced food and secure produced food, food that doesn't require a fertilizer from Russia, from Putin's Russia. I mean, here in the U.S., the farmers went crazy when Russia invaded Ukraine. We put this put the hurting on their imports, and suddenly fertilizer jumped 400%. Turns out that all the American farmers were dependent on Russia for their fertilizer. Well, that's not a very secure food system. On our farm, we just laugh because we don't buy any of it, so it didn't affect us at all. And consumers start seeing that. Food buyers begin seeing that, saying, "Whoa, wait a minute! I'm going to get my farm from a place that is not as dependent on foreign geopolitical whatever harmony." And so that's driving it. The system, though, as you mentioned, the government, the bureaucracy, the big players, they're not rolling out the red carpet for an alternative to come to market. And so, the single biggest impediment to what I would call the intentional seeking consumer and the intentional authentic production farmer, the fly in their ointment is what I call the food police, the regulations that, well, you can't make hot dogs without you can't butcher chickens on your farm. You can't sell a T-bone steak or a ribeye steak from your cow unless it goes to this facility and has this and this. All of the food safety regulations, are size prejudicial. They're all size prejudicial, which inherently makes them unfair. Somebody can ask, well, give me an example of a regulation that's not scale prejudicial. All right, the amount of effort it takes to push the brake of a commercial lorry. I think that's what you call tractor trailers in Great Britain. A lorry compared to for example, a smart car, a little tiny smart car. That's the same effort. So speed limits are a perfect example of a regulation that is not size or scale prejudicial. But all the food regulations are. For example, if I want to make pepperoni, if I want to make some charcuterie, I can't. There's going to be all sorts of licensing and requirements for me to make that charcuterie. The way innovation happens, if you study the diffusion of innovation, all innovation happens at embryonic prototype stages. You start with a prototype. You start very small, and then you grow from there. And the problem with food regulations is that they require such expensive infrastructure just to start, to butcher one chicken, to make one bucket full of trial charcuterie, all right, to make one meat pie for your neighbors, all right, that the entrepreneurial embryonic prototype is too expensive or too big to be birthed. And so that embryo is stillborn. And I travel the world, especially, this, by the way, is not the case in third world countries. You can pretty much, if you can butcher a chicken and sell it to a neighbor, have at it. They're happy to get it. But in our techno-sophisticated countries, those kinds of food freedoms to freely interact neighbor to neighbor as consenting adults, exercising freedom of choice as to what I'm going to eat. That kind of freedom is not available, and so so we've had our battles. I mean, one of the books that I wrote was "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal," describing the battles we've had with the food. I call it the food police, that continually get in the way between us and our very happy voluntary customers who want our food, and you have all these impediments in the ways. I mean, that's the number one impediment. And so, and in America, we've actually started the rogue food movement to shine a spotlight on farmers and food folks who have circumvented the government regulations. For example, here you can start a private membership association. So the government says, well, we've got to protect the public. Well, what about protecting the private? And so these are private associations that are developed to circumvent the regulations, because the food transaction is not a sale. It's not in commerce. It's simply a private arrangement between two people outside the government sphere. There's a lady in North Carolina that has started a 501c food church. If you join her church, you can get this food. And again, that's freedom of religion. We can exercise our religion. My religion requires me to get this kind of food. That's one. There's another thread that's developing under the American with Disabilities Act. My disability is I can't eat chemical food. So under American Disabilities Act, I demand the government to get out of the way of my getting this kind of food. See, the problem is in the U.S., we don't have a right to food choice. We have a right to assemble, and I know Great Britain doesn't have our Bill of Rights. We fought a war over that, and we got a Bill of Rights out of it. And our Bill of Rights guarantees us the ability to assemble, so we can assemble. People can get together without any license or requirement. We have freedom of religion. We can worship however we want to. There's no state church here. We have the right to bear arms. Oh, that's a big one. The right to own a gun. So these are rights, but there is no right for me to be able to acquire the food of my choice from the source of my choice. And in fact, one of our congressmen, Congressman Thomas Massey from Kentucky, has just put in a constitutional amendment for our Bill of Rights, and he just sent it to me. I can read it. It's short. The right of the people to grow food and to purchase food from the source of their choice shall not be infringed, and Congress shall make no law regulating the production and distribution of food products which do not move across state lines. And so that's now been put in and will now be debated going forward. Who knows how many years? But that is in direct response to exactly what you described. That there is a concerted effort in the fraternity of government and big business to thwart competitors coming to the table with innovative, higher quality, better products. I think that's the best way to say it. And so there's an active agister movement here in the U.S., which is modeled directly after the U.K. Agister movement of the Middle Ages, where a group of people would come together and own, for example, a stud horse, for example, that was too expensive for one person to own. So maybe 4 or 5 people would own it, and they would hire a person to take care of that horse. This was called an agister agreement. And that has now been used in the U.S. that so So you buy chicks, for example. You buy chicks for me. If you want 50 chickens, for example, for your family, for your freezer for the year, buy the 50 chicks. I will raise them under this medieval British Agister agreement. I will raise them and I will process them for you, all under the aegis of a caretaker. And that way, it's your chicken. You're simply paying a caretaker's fee, like a janitorial service, and you get your chicken, but they never enter commerce and they're not in sale. Therefore, they're not in the government system. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm just telling you there is a very active underground kind of guerrilla marketing effort here in the U.S. to circumvent the kind of things you're talking about that thwart the ease with which I can bring, a farm raised chicken or a farm raised egg or a homemade chicken pot pie, to my neighbors who want to buy it.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic you're drawing attention to people who are finding these ways of working around the current situation, because this is exactly the trap that's set by policy and by industry, and that effectively
Yes.
the overlap and the cross-pollination. And of course, all of this is enabled and driven by the confection of emergencies. At the moment, the current emergency and enduring one is what we're told is anthropogenic climate change, and therefore how the policy must be driven by the desire and the requirement for sustainability. And so, in a sense, we see something that's become a war of information. And with that being the case, you talk about quite rightly, you identify that there is a demand from people who want to source food that has not had all the pharmaceutical and chemical inputs. But the trouble is, those same people, everybody is getting a battering in terms of the information about this supposed emergency, to which the default response has to be this. How do we deal with this on the information side of it?
Yeah, well, on the information side, I've tried to showcase every time I see a report. I mean, probably one of the best is the Australian Walter Yenny, who is kind of the leading scientific climatologist, who says the whole greenhouse gas GHG story is completely false, and the atmospheric radiator, if you will, the radiator of the Earth, is actually condensation. It takes a lot of energy to condense water vapor into clouds, and those water vapors require a little itty bitty microscopic bacterium, to a little particle to coalesce around. It can't be dust. It's got to be living. It's got to be a bacteria, which is living water. It's they're we could go down another rabbit trail there, but the point is that that vegetation exudes this bacteria into the atmosphere, and that then allows the condensation of water, which then cools the Earth. And the problem is not greenhouse gas emissions. It is the fact that we have denuded so much land area in the world through overgrazing, through tillage, through cutting the rainforests. I mean, there are any number of things that have been done across planet-wide in many areas to reduce the vegetation. I mean, think about Libya. Back at the peak of the Roman Empire, Libya sent gorillas and lions to the Colosseum in Rome. Lions and gorillas live in the jungle. There's scarcely a tree in Libya now. It's a desert, and all of that vegetation was cut to feed the Rome rival city of Carthage, and that developed Homer, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He walked across what is today the Sahara Desert and said he never left the shade of a tree. Has civilization done tremendous damage? Yes, it has, but it's done it over time, and the Earth does warm and cool. There are different cycles, and so I'm not I agree that the anthropogenic look, when I grew up, I'm old enough to remember growing up when by this time we were all supposed to be in an ice age, due to dust in the atmosphere and the sun couldn't get through, and we were all gonna be frozen to death. Now we're all gonna be cooked to death as crispy critters. So I've watched just in my lifetime the scientific community do a complete inversion, which makes you question the entire thing, and so here we are at this stage of the game, and all I know, and so when I look at those kinds of inversions, I'm always interested in, well, what commonality? Where's the common ground? And interestingly, both the ice agers and the Earth warming scientists, both of them are talking about carbon in the atmosphere. And so I'm going to suggest, and again, I don't know about how much of this whole thing is created by people. What I do know is that worldwide we have moved the carbon from the soil to the atmosphere. And what happens then when the atmosphere becomes clogged, the carbon dioxide actually starts making plants grow better. And so you end up, the earth kind of starts to heal itself as the carbon dioxide makes leaves more productive, because that's what plants need, leaves more productive. And then they exude more bacteria, which makes better clouds, which makes the hydrology come back into an equilibrium state again. And so there's this constant cycling. And so the commonality between both schools of thought is about carbon. And so we need to put the carbon back in the soil. In Australia in 1820, the average organic matter in the soil was 20%. Today, it's scarcely 2%. Today, in the United States, 500 years ago, the average organic matter in the soil was up around 6%. Today, we're a little over 1%. So all that organic matter, which is related to carbon, all that organic matter in the soil is gone. Where did it go? It went into the atmosphere. And so doing the systems that we use here at our farm with the controlled grazing and the multi-speciation and the perennial, that's another thing, the perennial pasture development, we have raised our organic matter in my lifetime from 1% in 1961 to 8.2% today. All we would need, listen, Charles, all we would need in the United States, I don't know about the world, but in the United States at least, if we just raised our organic matter 1% nationwide across all farm and ranch land, if we just raised it 1% nationwide, we would return atmospheric carbon to pre-industrial levels, like back to like 1960. Just 1%. On our farm, we've raised it 7%. So it is doable. And this is a very doable thing. And when you realize that organic matter also is the sponge of the soil and reduces flooding and reduces drought and all those kinds of things, you start realizing pretty quickly, hey, let's devote ourselves to increasing our organic matter in our soils, and that solves a multitude of issues.
Absolutely. I mean, that's clearly the key to it. And it's, we talk about the sort of climate issue and generating, therefore, something that can be put in front of people as a threat, and therefore these corporations and so-called philanthropists come up with solutions. For example, Bill Gates with his sort of Gates Ag One project and all the rest of it, Jeff Bezos with his Earth Fund, all these guys now jumping on the sort of regenerative agriculture bandwagon at the same time as pushing ahead with fake food, meat grown in labs and all that side of it. One thing that I think we haven't really so much talked about is the dimension of human health and how people are in large part not conscious at all of the relationship between exactly what you're describing, what they're buying, and how healthy they are. How do we deal with these projects that are effectively sort of hijacking legitimate concerns for the environment or legitimate concerns for human health by making out that they've got it covered. You only have to look at Unilever or Kraft or Cargill, who all say they're doing this, that, and the other, but actually they're not.
Yeah, they certainly aren't. Well, first of all, on the fake food, the lab grown, cell cultured, meat substitutes. Let me just say at the top, as an opener, that is the most undemocratic way to feed populations that's ever been invented. The beauty of natural systems is, as long as the sun shines and the rain falls, you can grow a plant, you can grow an animal, you can have a milk cow. All right, but if all of that, if the only way to acquire food is through a $1 billion Bill Gates owned laboratory of synthetics, suddenly that democratic access to food becomes tightly controlled. And I don't know about you, but I think most people, when they think of that level of controlled access, very quickly realize this this is not progress. It is a regression into a pre-Magna Carta kind of a food system. So, if I may use our great British friends and the history there, I mean that was all about King John and control. Who's going to control the land? What are going to be the rights of the lords and nobles and even the peasants? It established the commons. All of these kind of rights were demanded at that time to democratize access to markets, to food, to land, to these kinds of things. And so that would be my opening thing. The second thing is to realize that now empirically we can test for nutrient density in foods, and there's a group in America called the Bionutrient Food Association, founded by Dan Kittredge, and the Bionutrient Food Association has been studying the variations, the wide variations in different foods. The first one they did, I think, was a carrot, and what they found was that so that they got all these carrots, they tested them for numerous, vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and stuff, and they found that you would have to eat like 100 of the worst carrots to get the nutrition of the best carrot. The same thing was found in broccoli. They're now doing beef, for example, and beef. And they're measuring 150 nutrients in beef. Riboflavin, conjugated linoleic acid, B12, B6, vitamin K, all these different things, minerals, 150 of them. And the one thing that they've already found, there's still active research. It's ongoing. But the one thing they've found, the most signal determinant of nutrition in beef is how many different kinds of plants did the animal eat. Isn't that fascinating? How many different kinds of plants did the animal eat? And so a beef cow fed or dairy cow fed, for example, just corn silage or a very simplified ration is not going to offer the same nutrition by long shot. We're not talking about little 5% deviations. We're talking about, well, for example, in grass-finished beef, for example, the average grass-finished beef has 300% more riboflavin than grain-finished beef. Conjugated linoleic acid, which is an anti-carcinogen. I mean, you can just go down the line. We had our eggs tested actually at a lab. We worked with an independent outfit that wanted to allay, finally and put to rest this idea that, oh, come on, it doesn't make any difference whether you farm this way or that way. So they got 12 of us around the U.S. to do pastured eggs. We said, could you send them to a lab? And we sent them to a lab, and so we got this wonderful test back on about 12 nutrients. And the USDA official, commercial conventional label on an egg nutrition is it has 48 micrograms of folic acid, for example, per egg, 48 micrograms per egg, and ours averaged over 1,000 micrograms per egg. So these are not little deviations; these are big deviations. And so when we talk about health and human nutrition, the reason that we're having the number of health problems we are, and I'm sure in Great Britain you're having the same, maybe not the same as the U.S., but similar. You're seeing increase of autism, you're seeing increase of cancer, and these chronic, obesity and a lack of fertility, both men and women, especially men, a lack of fertility. These kinds of things. These are all indicative of a lack of nutrition in the food that we eat. And so not only, not eating processed food, ultra processed, that's kind of an obvious don't eat, but even the difference between a squash grown in compost rich soil versus a squash grown in chemical soil, the difference in nutrition is off the charts. And we've got numerous studies. You can look at the charts, you can look at the data, and it's very, very clear. And so thinking people, intentionally minded people, are viewing these alternatives and saying, hey, I'm gonna feed my microbiome more the kind of things that it would have eaten 200 years ago, rather than the stuff that it is today. The only reason life expectancy has gone up in the last century is not because of better nutrition. It's because we've been able to reduce infant mortality. In 1850, 43% of all babies born in 1850 did not see their fifth birthday. So if you made it to your fifth birthday, you were probably good to 90 years old. So life expectancy hasn't really gone up, but that's what averages and data do to you. They skew things sometimes, and we don't realize a lot of women died in childbirth. In the U.S., the number one killer of women in 1900 was burns. Those big hoop skirts. They'd catch on fire on the hearth, the wood fire, and there goes mama up in flames, and without good burn care units, a lot of them got infections and died. So our mortality, our overall life expectancy has actually not changed. In fact, a lot of people would argue it's actually gone down. It's only skewed because of the averages with infant mortality, childbirth, burns and infectious disease like cholera, whooping cough, things like that, which were urban problems that gradually got solved by plumbers, not by vaccines.
Absolutely, and now the great push to get us all out of rural areas and back into vast conurbations where we're easier to control. And control, of course, is something that we need to come back to. Nutrition, in the United Kingdom, we have an enormous and destructive organisation called the National Health Service, which doesn't contain the word nutrition even in its lexicon. We are told by government that the reason we have to subsidise farming was because of the emergency during the Second World War, and it's the only way to feed the nation. And we talk about food security, of course, utterly hollow, because we have nothing like food security here. The counter to what you're saying will always be, yes, but you can't produce enough food for everybody in that way. Tell the audience why that's not true.
Oh, it's absolutely not true. I don't know what the statistics are in the UK, but I can tell you that in the US we have 36 million acres. I'm sorry, 35 million acres of lawn. I don't know how many acres of lawn there are in the UK, but there's a lot of lawn. I mean, the UK invented the lawn, right? I mean, that's historically that's where the lawn came from. If you were wealthy enough to have a lawn rather than a garden, you were pretty well off. So there's a lot of lawn, and number two, in the U.S. we have 36 million. I always get one's 35, one's 36. 36 million acres devoted to housing and feeding recreational horses. Now, I'm not opposed to horses. I don't hate horses. What I am suggesting, though, is look, if it comes between starvation and a horse, I'm going to get rid of the horse and grow food. And so these are lifestyle decisions culturally that we make. If in the U.S., if we just took the lawn and the horse and took those 35 and 36 million acres, we could feed the entire country without a single farm. I mean, that's astounding. All right, and so the UK is similar in that it is more populated than the U.S. That is true, but it also doesn't have the arid Southwest and deserts of New Mexico and Arizona. So the UK is an incredibly abundant area, and I've been there numerous times. I love everything about the UK, except that you can't have a gun. But otherwise, I love going there, visiting. But under the same scarcity issues as the U.S., in that a lot more can be done by stacking enterprises on a piece of land, like we do, as opposed to having segregated food systems. You have integrated food systems. I mean, I think the UK is a little worse than America in its inability to, for example, salvage waste food and use it for either human food or livestock feed. It becomes very, very difficult. This is outrageous. I mean, historically, pigs and chickens were right up against the household because they ate all the garden scraps and all this. Those things were not composted. They became the first cycle of feed to the next thing. But we've got yogurt operations. We've got cheese making operations that don't feed their leftovers, their spoilage, or their whey to pigs, for example. This is a no-brainer. We need to integrate these processing and waste streams as a first step in an integrated food production approach, as opposed to a segregated food production approach, where we split up all these historic marriages and replace them instead with truckloads and trainloads of imported things and energy intensive, chemically intensive, infrastructure intensive kind of substitutes.
You're quite right, and yet we see people continually being pushed in effectively in the wrong direction by so many of these controlling influences. Although it's, you articulate so clearly how things can be done, how things can be changed, how there can be a better outcome for the environment, for the livestock, for the farm, for the farmer, and for the consumer. And yet most of the sort of information content out there is telling you that no, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, you mustn't do it like that.
If I might add one thing right there, Charles, think about the dynamic, for example, of edible landscaping. Now, I like flowers. I like flowers as much as anybody else, but the whole edible landscaping idea, that instead of having just an ornamental tree, well, let's have an apple tree, a pear tree, a peach tree. It doesn't take any more soil or maintenance to have a fruit or nut producing tree as just an ornamental tree. And so, but there's Charles, there's almost an elitist stigma against integrating and incorporating something like farming into the urban sector. I mean, I got a call from a lady in Texas who's in a homeowners association, and she had to pay a fine to her homeowners association because she had the audacity to grow 2 tomato plants in her garden space. And the homeowners association said, that's farming. Farming is not allowed in this homeowner space. She had to pay a fine for growing 2 tomatoes instead of, daffodils and lilies. And that kind of elitist mentality, listen, we have to rediscover that we're part of the ecology. We can't levitate into some Star Trek nirvana unanchored and disconnected to this ecological umbilical. We are very attached to this ecological umbilical. And so let's lean in, let's lean into our attachment instead of leaning away from it. And if we do that, there is not a country in the world, and I've traveled worldwide for many years. There's not a country in the world that can't feed itself. That's like the ultimate civilizational preservation technique. And but it takes everyone realizing that I have both the responsibility and the privilege of participating. I can't just sit on the bleachers and expect somebody else to play the game. I have to begin to participate so that I become part of the solution and not just a whiner or a complainer or a parasite on society.
It's absolutely the right philosophy, and I think that will galvanise and inspire. Now, a percentage of the UK column audience are involved in various agricultural projects. The vast majority, of course, aren't and don't own land. You've spoken about being able to use whatever space you do have to grow food, like fruit trees is a great example. We'll have to wind up in a minute, but just as a sort of closing remark, I mean, how would you encourage people on the individual level to do, to make a difference, to be able to shape their futures and take control of their food supply in the right way, but also to support their local economy and to make it work in the manner that you describe?
Sure. So this is one of my favorite questions. I have a three-part recipe. So 3 parts. Number one is get in your kitchen. We have to stop buying processed food. We have to start touching raw ingredients, develop domestic culinary arts, especially in the UK. We've never had so many sophisticated techno gadgets in our kitchens. I'm not talking about living in your kitchen. I mean, grandma would give her eye teeth for the things that we have. You don't have to go to a spring with a wooden bucket to bring water. You don't have to, split wood to put in a wood stove to cook on. We've got hot and cold running water, refrigerators, Instapots, crock pots. We've got, all sorts of gadgetry, ice cream makers, bread makers. So the first thing is to stop patronizing the big centralized processors and use raw ingredients and embrace your own kitchen and your own domestic culinary arts. That's number one. You cannot have an authentic food system with so many people this profoundly abdicating their participation in it. You can't abdicate that audit, if you will. All right, that's number one. Number two is do something yourself. I don't care whether it's a little hanging. There's all these neat little urban like pocketed PVC pillars that you can have on your porch, for example, to grow herbs in, to grow things in. You can have a pot garden on your porch. You can grow vegetables. If you can grow pot too, that's fine too. But my point is, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can put a beehive on the roof. You can put a vermicomposting kit under your sink. You can put a quart jar of mung bean sprouts on the windowsill. Okay, but do something yourself to viscerally encounter the mystery and majesty of growing something, of life, and realize that there's something bigger than you, bigger than Netflix, bigger than video things out there. All right. So number one, get in your kitchen. Number two, do something yourself. And number three, find your provenance. Sleuth your provenance. So you can take your entertainment budget for the year, for example, and say for 1 year, instead of going to the theater and going out to eat, whatever, we're going to devote our attention to finding our local food sources, our good local food sources. We're going to find farmers that pasture their livestock and don't have them in confinement houses. We're going to find farmers who have whose fertilizer is from compost not from chemical fertilizers. We're gonna find these people, and we're going to patronize them. We're going to find the produce operator that does local produce, and so find your own. Put attention on finding your own local provenance, and gradually replace that supermarket experience and that dependency on on corporate on industrial. I won't say corporate, on industrial processes. So that's my recipe, Charles. 3 things: get in your kitchen, do something yourself, and find your provenance.
Terrific. Joel, those are great words of wisdom and experience to finish up with. Now, I'm not going to let you go before I ask you, please, to tell us where we can follow what you're doing and thinking, and to get more information on your background. So any sort of social media or website links that we can take a look at.
Sure. So I'm a bit of an iconoclast. I don't even have a smartphone. I'm still on flip phone material. So I don't have a personal social media, but our farm, Polyface, Polyface, Polyface Farm, has a very extensive website. And of course, I have a blog that I do called Musings from the Lunatic Farmer. I do a weekly podcast, Beyond Labels, with Dr. Sina McCullough. We have, instructive videos. I've written 16 books. They are available in the UK, and so the Polyface Farms website is where you can follow me, follow the farm, follow our work at your leisure. And just let me say, we have many visitors from around the world every year, and we love our UK visitors because we just sit and let them talk and enjoy the wonderful British accent. Nobody here ever gets tired of the wonderful British accent.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure all those various links and whatnot are put with this interview at ukcolumn.org. And I should just remind the audience that if you are in a position to support UK Column financially and you're not already doing so, it does cost £5 a month, and we'd be very grateful for the support, because it will enable us to continue to provide interviews of such quality as this has been with Joel. So it just remains for me to thank you, Joel, very, very much indeed, for all that you've spoken about, all that we've covered. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we'll keep in touch and be able to speak to you again in future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It's been my honor.